It's Jan of 2025. The winters in Delhi have been quite shallow. Certain counties in Los Angeles have burned down over the last few weeks. Texas is seeing a winter storm. You say that climate change is something that is not new. It has happened before. Why are these events happening at the same time? Explain that. Why do you make that statement?
Health will be the biggest victim of climate change.
One mental model which I personally really love and which is applicable to either financial markets or climate is the concept of, let's say, stock and flow. But all of these rich nations are still not taking the responsibility, number one.
Just like we take a blanket in the winters to keep ourselves warm, right? And what the blanket does is, it doesn't kind of bring any external warmth to us. It makes sure that our body warmth doesn't escape and therefore keeps us warm. It's a very complex issue, right? There are no right or wrong answers to that.
Let's say if the world breaches these flashpoints, we could sense some trouble brewing. Today we have Mr. Rajan Mehta, the best-selling author of Backstage Climate. He's a serial tech entrepreneur and has successfully founded 2 companies. In 2022, he went to Harvard University as a research fellow where he focused his efforts on climate change. He is now leading climate action labs dedicated to driving impactful solutions to mitigate this crisis. The world is shifting from a unipolar to a multipolar global order. Trump is back and power is realigning. AI is rising, reshaping jobs and rewriting futures. The planet is warming up while the birth rates fall. To see these in isolation is to miss the bigger picture. A world which is unsteady, unpredictable and transforming before our eyes. Let's make sense of the happening from India's lens, one conversation at a time. Welcome to the Nagrik Podcast with Hari. I think it's kind of an interesting time to be having this conversation, right? It's Jan of 2025. The winters in Delhi have been quite shallow. Certain counties in Los Angeles, which probably happens to be one of the most expensive real estate markets in the world, have burned down over the last few weeks, because of the wildfire thing. Texas, where I happened to spend a couple of years and which was probably a hot, area, in the United States, is seeing a winter storm and seeing, a lot of snow as well. Why are these events happening in different places of the world at the same time? How should we make sense of all of these events?
These are manifestations of climate change, and that's exactly what it's supposed to do. Because see, what is happening is this whole global warming has got some extra energy into our planet, right? And that energy is being redistributed. And it gets redistributed through wind and ocean currents, right? And as these winds and ocean currents are moving, their interactions with local situations in various geographies are changing, right? And that is what is causing all these aberrations that we are seeing. For example, if you talk about California, one of the major reasons for the fires there are the Santa Ana winds, which, because of the high pressure in the Nevada desert, rise up from there and move towards California. These are very dry kind of winds, right? And those kind of spark the fires there. There are other reasons also, because the species of plants and, the undergrowth that is happening and all that stuff, and probably a human element as well. But that's the primary reason. So climate is playing a role in intensifying or further drying up these Santa Ana winds, and you see the results. As regards the short winter in Delhi, earlier the intense winter in Delhi used to happen because of 2-3 reasons, right? One of them was the western disturbances. They used to be strong and therefore bring the cold wave here. Second was Himalayas used to get a lot more snow than what they're getting now, right? And the third was the winds that would come from the Arabian Sea during this time of the year were not as warm. All 3 factors have changed, right? The western disturbances have kind of mellowed down. The snow in the Himalayas has reduced, and there's been warming of the Arabian Sea per se because of global warming. Therefore, as the winds are coming, they're getting warmed up and they're having an effect on Delhi as well. So it gives you there is a logic behind all this. And I think the lever that is kind of twisting all this is climate change.
I think one of the takeaways that I, take from your response is that there's just not one particular reason that is leading to. So, right, it's a complex problem. Maybe we can talk about different butterfly effects and all of those things, but it seems that there are multiple things playing out simultaneously, and therefore the convergence of all of these specific factors lead to all these events.
That's true. See, the permutations, combinations, climate is a complex thing. It's, as you rightly said, it's not one lever that changes all of it. It's a complex thing. So the interactions between, the wind, the pressure, the surface temperature, the humidity, all of it is changing, and somewhere it's creating the effect that we are seeing.
Let's move forward to the conversation. So Rajan basically late last year launched his book, The Backstage Climate, and I went through the book over the last month or so, and it's been a pretty fascinating read overall. I haven't seen a more comprehensive and exhaustive primer than this ever before. So I think kudos Rajan for putting something out, and I think it seems to me that for such an multidisciplinary problem like climate, I think we need these kind of conversations and books to come out with even more detailed, right? One thing that I felt was that each chapter could have a book of its own, and yet at the same time the way you threaded all of these pieces is super interesting. So you say that one, again, the start of the book itself is quite impactful. You say that climate change is something that is not new. It has happened before, and it keeps on happening over different time periods. So explain that. Why do you make that statement?
Sure. So, like most other things, climate change is also cyclical, actually. If you look at the climatic history of our planet, then ever since its start, it's been going through these cycles where at one end it becomes extremely hot, and at the other end it becomes extremely cold, almost a ball of ice and back again. Now, these cycles repeat over millions of years. So actually there are two cycles, the big cycle and what we call as the small cycle. The big cycle happens every 65 to 100 million years. And then the shorter cycle happens 80,000 to 100,000 years, right? The reason these happen are because of two natural phenomena. One is called the orbital cycle, and the other one is called the carbon cycle. The orbital cycle is governed by the revolution of the Earth around the sun and also its rotation around its own axis, right? And there are certain permutations and combinations within this, wherein at one end, Earth receives the maximum amount of sunlight, and the summers are very long, right? And therefore, this situation takes us into the warming of the planet. The reverse is also true. When the Earth is very far from the sun and our poles are or our North Pole is twisted or bent away from the Earth, away from the sun. So the Earth receives very little sunlight and the summers are very short. So what happens, whatever snow falls during that period doesn't melt. And over years and decades and ages, it starts accumulating and takes us into an ice age, right? So that's the orbital cycle. There's more to it, and I think the book explains that. The other phenomenon is the carbon cycle, right? The amount of carbon in our planet's, the Earth's system is fixed actually, but it keeps moving between the atmosphere, the biosphere, the geosphere, and the hydrosphere, which is the ocean. Right? When the carbon or its gaseous derivatives accumulate in the atmosphere, the Earth starts getting warm, and when they reduce, it starts getting cold. So now you take the orbital cycle and the carbon cycle, and again work out some permutations and combinations. There are times when both converge towards taking us into an ice age, and there are times when they both converge to taking us away from the uh, ice age, right? Now, those are very complex calculations on time and other things. I don't think we should go into it right now. But these are the two things that govern, you know, what happens to our planet naturally. But really speaking, as I mentioned to you about the carbon cycle, um, just like we uh, take a blanket in the winters to keep ourselves warm, right? And what the blanket does is it doesn't kind of bring any external warmth to us. It makes sure that our body warmth doesn't escape and therefore keeps us warm, right? Same way, uh, the earth has a blanket as well. And this blanket is composed of what I just spoke about, carbon or its gaseous derivatives, or actually, broadly speaking, the greenhouse gases, right? They form a blanket around the earth. And it's actually very useful to have this blanket, because if there were no greenhouse gases, the average temperature of the earth would be around minus 18 degrees centigrade, minus 18, right? So we would be in a frozen land, right? It's thanks to the greenhouse gases and the blanket they have formed that they are keeping the warmth of the earth within the system and not letting it escape. And therefore, today we enjoy a temperature of around 15 degrees centigrade, on the globe. The challenge is that the blanket is becoming thicker, very thick, actually, and very fast, right? And that's happening because of human intervention, because we humans have discovered this black gold, fossil fuels. We are also industrializing, and we are changing the composition of our land, right? All these things are kind of emitting greenhouse gases, which are going up, accumulating, thickening the blanket, and with the result, the heat is not escaping the earth, it's being retained inside. And that is what is causing discomfort, global warming, and climate change.
So what we're trying to say is that over, especially since the industrial age, right, the concentration of carbon and greenhouse gases has increased in the atmosphere, and that due to that, the heat, the amount of heat that's getting trapped is continuously increasing, right? So I think let's talk about this entire facet. So you also talk about the heat getting trapped, and also the fact that the heat getting absorbed and not getting reflected. So could you talk about both those factors combined?
Sure. So this is called the albedo effect. Uh, Plain simple physics that white surfaces reflect light back and dark surfaces absorb light, right? So let's say we are getting 100 units. The Earth receives most of its energy from the sun, and it receives by way of sunlight, right? Let's say we are receiving around 100 units of energy, right? Out of that, 30% gets reflected back into space because of albedo effect, and the reflection happens from glaciers, which are white, from clouds, which are white, and from white sands, right? So the Earth actually receives only 70% of the sun's energy, which is used by mankind to run its affairs. But at the end of the day, every object must maintain its energy balance. So the excess energy is radiated back, and it's radiated back as infrared rays or thermal energy. So you see, the Earth gets its energy by way of light, but it radiates it back by way of heat, right? Now, what happens is when this energy is radiating out, or the infrared rays are leaving the Earth, atmospheric gases like oxygen and nitrogen, which dominate the atmosphere, let it pass transparently. But the greenhouse gases prevent the escape of these infrared rays. And that happens because of the atomic structure of the greenhouse gases, and also the frequency or the wavelength of the electrons. Now, again, back to high school physics, we were taught that when a troop of military people are walking over a bridge, they're always asked to break their step. Because if they don't, then their steps start resonating with the frequency of the bridge, and the bridge can break. And it has happened actually in real life many a times, right? Same kind of phenomenon is happening in the atmosphere. When the infrared rays, they start resonating with the electrons. So electrons get excited, they start absorbing the heat, their temperature rises, and instead of reflecting the heat out, they start reflecting it back and collecting it. So that's what then causes the planet to warm.
Interesting. So okay, so I think these factors combined, again, I think even though all of these concepts are taught in school, in various shapes and forms, but I think the cumulative effect and how it affects our daily lives, and let's say all these factors combining, and when you talk about the albedo effect, isn't something the intersection of all of these concepts coming together is something which I think should be pursued more. I think one other thing which one mental model which I personally really love, and which is applicable to either financial markets or climate, is the concept of, let's say, stock and flow, right? So it'll be good to know of, let's say, one thing is that, okay, there's a certain amount of carbon dioxide or greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, right? That's, let's say, becomes the stock. But the real problem, or let's say the acceleration in the problem, is also because of the flow, the increasing flow. So can you talk about that particular concept as well?
So climate change is a stock and flow problem, right? And both are playing havoc, you know. So the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere has been accumulating for ages, actually, and especially got accelerated after the Industrial Revolution. And actually, it's really, I mean, it's gone to the next level after 1990, when really the world kind of went on another trajectory to grow.
When even the eastern countries like China and India also started developing, right?
So the again, coming back to the analogy of a blanket, right? The blanket is thick already, and as we continue to emit more and more greenhouse gases, we are making it thicker and thicker, right? Now, in terms of the solution to this, is we definitely need to kind of thin this blanket, right? There are two ways of doing it. One is we stop the addition of new greenhouse gases, right? And therefore, that's how you hear this whole strategy about mitigation, right? Where they're trying to transition energy from its thermal sources to clean sources. We're trying to shift the transportation again from IC-based engines to electric. We're trying to decarbonize the industry. We're trying to bring changes in land use so that the emissions reduce. And you would have heard the term net zero. The idea is that the net carbon dioxide or its equivalents, greenhouse gases, there should be no more addition of these into the atmosphere. Now, even if we are, and the world is targeting, as per the Paris Agreement, that we do it by 2050. Some countries may not be able to do it. Some may do it. But it's a daunting task, right? Because our entire economic structure, our industrial structure, our societal structures are built around fossil fuels. And to, kind of dismantle them is not very easy. So be that as it may, let's say even if we were to bring the emissions to zero by 2050, 2060, 2070, whenever we say, the problem is not going to go away because of the stock of carbon dioxide or greenhouse gases already there. They will continue to warm the planet because of something called as the climate inertia, right? These greenhouse gases stay in the atmosphere for thousands of years, right? So, as long as they are there, the planet will continue to warm. So, if we really need to bring down or really control climate change, then we will have to bring down the stock of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, which means we have to deploy some negative emission technologies to suck out the carbon. And the world has been working on that. There are technologies like direct air capture and many others. And you can do it by natural means, or you can do it by technology means. But I think at some stage, we will have to do that.
So I think a broad takeaway for the viewers should be that whenever, let's say, countries talk about net zero, right, we are essentially talking about ensuring that the flow of the net new gases becomes zero. Whereas all the historical, when you talk about all of these technologies like DACE, direct air capture, or some of the likes of those, they are primarily responsible for, let's say, reducing the stock or reducing the flow itself, right? Right, negative emission.
Suck out the carbon. So even things like afforestation, reforestation, there's something called as accelerated weathering, where you make the rocks kind of, absorb carbon dioxide and shove it into the ground by way of carbonates. So yeah, there are many of these approaches. Oceans can be used for that as well.
Interesting. So I think from here, let's talk more about, you kind of briefly alluded to this in the conversation here, but let's try to understand what are the broad levers through which, greenhouse gases are kind of getting into the atmosphere. Of course, put simply, any form of human activity leads to that. But I think to better structure this problem, it'll be good to understand what are the 2 to 3 broad levers through which or which are the major factors through which, let's say, the greenhouse gases are the sources of the greenhouse gases.
Yeah, sure. So broadly speaking, there are three. The most important one is fossil fuels. Fossil fuels contribute around 70% of greenhouse gases, right? The second is industry, contributes around 20%. And the third is land use changes and agriculture. They contribute around 10%. Now, if you look at fossil fuels, their primary use is in 3 categories. The first is power generation. Even today, 2/3 of the electricity worldwide is produced using fossil fuels: coal, gas, petrol, right? Primarily coal. And it's kind of adding probably close to 25 billion tons of carbon dioxide every year, right? That's the primary source.
So we are saying basically, just to make the maths clear. So we talk about fossils being 70, industry being 20%, and the land use being 10. And out of that 70%, the 2/3 is for electricity purpose. So we can very well say that close to about 40 to 45% of the net greenhouse gas emissions is coming from the electricity generation through.
I read just recently is 42% of the greenhouse gases are coming from thermal sources of electricity generation.
Interesting. Okay.
So that's one, the power generation. The second is transportation. Transportation uses around or emits around 29% of the greenhouse gases out of the fossil fuel category. Overall, I think it's probably 20-21%, but right. So both, or all 3 modes: the land, the sea, and the air travel, right? So that's the second. The third place where fossil fuels are used is heating, both industrial and home heating. Well, in India, we don't have much of home heating, but in the Western colder countries, it's used for home heating. So that consumes around 5%, 5 to 7% of fossil fuels as well. So fossil fuels is the bigger category. The second is industry. Just cement and steel contribute around 12-13% of the total greenhouse gases. If you look at cement, one of the major ingredients for cement manufacturing is limestone. So you heat limestone to convert it into lime. So limestone is CaCO3. You heat it, it gives out carbon dioxide and turns into CaO, which is lime, which is then kind of put through the process. Huge amount of carbon dioxide is emitted, right? Likewise for steel, you take iron ore, you first reduce the iron ore into metallic iron, and you do that by heating iron, mixing iron ore with coke. Coke is purified coal out of which carbon dioxide has been taken out. And when you are taking out the carbon dioxide from coal to make it into coke, you heat it in a environment so that all the oxygen in that or impurities get oxidized and get out by way of carbon dioxide, right? So that gives out a lot. And then you convert the metallic this thing into steel through a process which again gives out carbon dioxide. So these are very, very greenhouse gas intense processes and industries.
Interesting. So we talked
And-
about right. And
Sorry, I missed the third one, which is land use and agriculture. And it's interesting because a lot of us think that something as natural as land and agriculture, how can that be a spoiler? But the fact is, it is. See, because as human population has increased, or even animal population, we've had to clear out forests, and we've done that by either burning them or cutting them. If you burn them, of course, carbon dioxide is getting into the atmosphere. But if you cut them also, the foliage decomposes and carbon dioxide gets into the atmosphere. Then the farming techniques that we use, tilling the land. Each time you're tilling, you're bringing out organic matter which is settled in the ground. You're exposing it to heat, oxygen, moisture, and therefore it starts decomposing. So a huge amount of greenhouse gases get emitted each time you till. Then there is the whole process of cultivation for certain crops like rice and some others. You flood the fields. And when you flood the fields, the microbes which are underneath, they undergo anaerobic fermentation because of lack of oxygen. They're covered with water. And therefore they give out methane. Methane is 80 times as potent as carbon dioxide. Then there is food wastage, right? 33% of the food grown is wasted, and wasted food is decomposition, right? And again, we are adding. And then there's also cattle, or ruminant animals rather. So ruminant animals, unlike we human beings, have multiple stomachs because their feed is very complex sugars. If they eat grass and stuff like that, so some of the stomachs are used for fermentation to digest the food, and as that happens, methane is given out. That's how you see cattle belching sometimes with the white foam. That's basically methane coming out. So they're large contributors of methane, and then their manure and various other ways that they contribute to greenhouse gases as well.
Interesting. So even from a land use perspective, which happens to be the third factor, we are talking about multiple things. So let's say the cattle growing on the land, the forest being cut out so that cattle grows, and then of course from a typical food production point of view, let's say when we grow multiple crops, so all of those three factors combined. Right.
What you're doing is you're cutting off or erasing natural, trees or grasslands or whatever. So first is you're reducing the carbon absorption capacity of the earth, right, through photosynthesis each time you clear. Second, when you disturb the land, you're putting organic stuff or microbes which are buried underneath. You're exposing them to heat, air, water, and therefore the decomposition starts. So all of these kind of contribute to greenhouse gases.
So again, I think coming back to the factor that we mentioned earlier, it's so complex that when you see urbanization happening, you are using more cement and steel, right? So the industry is emitting. Then you are, to ensure that urbanization happens, you're cutting down trees, right? So that becomes another factor. So even any country that's, let's say, going on the arc of development is, through the process of not just generation of or production of, let's say, cement and steel, but also through the reduction of, natural systems.
And also, the moment you grow, you need energy, right? I mean, if you're building a house or a factory, uh, you will need energy, definitely. But I want to add here that development is inevitable and you can't kind of get sidetracked, right? I mean, the West has all grown, right? They use energy, they've really kind of grown to that level. And now it's the turn of the developing world to do that. So we can't kind of say that, because of climate, the impact on climate, we won't develop. That won't be fair for people living in the developing world. So the solution lies that how do you kind of transition to green sources of energy, adopt green technologies for whether it's production of cement or steel, uh, come up with regulations so that less of cement and steel is used in the construction. Uh, Come up with regulations that if you're cutting down trees from some part, then equivalent or more double the number of trees need to be planted somewhere else. So there are ways of doing a clean development, right? I think that's what we should be focused on.
Since the time of industrialization, right? So all the rich and developed nations, which the entire Western world, US, UK, Australia, Canada, and of course the combination of, let's say, the Western Europe, right? All of these have been essentially, their development has led to the rise in the concentration of, let's say, CO2 in the atmosphere, right? And one thing that we constantly see, whether it's in the different climate pacts, agreements, and so on, that all of these rich nations are still not, let's say, taking the responsibility, number one, or number two, even acknowledging the fact that, let's say, the next stage of the development, or let's say the financing of the new technologies, should be primarily driven through these countries. What do you think needs to happen? Are these acts, agreements, are they able to, in a way, use the historical inconsistencies that have led to the current challenges? And are these different collaboration efforts that we have in place today, the different governance structures that we have in place today, are they able to, use this particular historical fact and ensure that the developing nations are not just provided with different financing techniques, but also the developed world takes care of the development of the new technologies? Like, what do you have to say on this?
It's a very complex issue, right? And there are no right or wrong answers to that. But I must say that if you look at the Paris Agreement, it has attempted to bring countries on a common platform, right? First is it's very difficult to pinpoint exact responsibility, right? Undoubtedly, the whole problem has been caused by the developed world. I think there's no debate on that. But what percentage share, nobody is able to really say that with any certainty, right? But one of the good things that the Paris Agreement did was it had a clause called common but differentiated responsibilities, right? See, we are in a situation that or climate change is not an individual problem. It's a global problem, right? Carbon dioxide or any greenhouse gas emitted here goes up in the air, mixes and travels everywhere. So, like what you mentioned earlier, the butterfly effect, if I'm emitting carbon dioxide, it could go and cause a storm, metaphorically speaking, in Timbuktu, right? Now, anybody could get harmed, right? So what the Paris Agreement said, we recognize that one, different countries have contributed differently to this problem. It said we also recognize that every country does not have the same capability or cannot afford to kind of now invest in addressing this problem, right? So they said, countries, you go and do your homework and come back to tell us how much contribution can you make in terms of reduction of the greenhouse gases. They put a target there that in order to maintain life on Earth the way we are used to, we should not go above 2 degrees centigrade compared to the pre-industrial levels, right? Because if it goes, then it may become uncontrollable or maybe uncomfortable. Now, if this is the target, there was a carbon budget worked out that we need to reduce overall the emissions and the stock of carbon by this much. You come and tell us. So each country went, they saw how much could they afford, what could they do, and came back, right? And those became what are called the NDCs, or the nationally determined contributions. These are all voluntary. So each country has promised something and hopefully are working towards it. There are two things to it, right? One is that the target that the countries have taken, you can break it down into two. One, which they can achieve without any external help, right? It's within our means to do it, we will do it. The second is, they say that we need external help, both in terms of technology and in financing, right? Which is where the tussle is going on, right? The developing world is saying, if you want us to meet those targets, then please make money and technology available. And the developed world has been slow and miser, if I can say, in loosening its purse strings, right? They've been attempting. First it was 100 billion. They had to contribute, reach to a contribution level of 100 billion per year by 2022. They barely met it. In fact, probably there was some gap in it. And then in this COP, they were to present what is called the NCQT, which was the new funding they would provide. While the developing world was asking for 1.3 trillion, the developed world has offered 300 billion, and that too over a period of a decade. So obviously there is a lot of gap here. But, I personally think it's not very easy to extract money from the rich nations, right? They also have their parliaments or their governments and their electorate to face, why are you giving out money and things like that. And the developing world must kind of continue to press them to get this, because only then we'll be able to handle the problem. But what I wanted to say is that we should continue on the path of transitioning our energy, decarbonizing our system, our industry, and whatever else is within our means. And I say this because, as we said, climate can strike anywhere, the climate calamity. I really wish it doesn't strike anywhere. But let's say if it strikes in the developed world, they have the money, they have the technology, they have the systems to take care of it. If it strikes in the developing world, we have none. We have only nature to look to. So therefore, we must kind of do our bit to make sure that we are not disturbing this whole cycle of nature by putting up more and more greenhouse gases. We should start kind of reducing them on our own anyway.
Interesting. So you say that, let's say, from a responsibility standpoint, definitely, the developed world has been a little hesitant in providing the financing and the technology, but still the imperative is on the developing countries as well, because let's say the downside effects of climate mishappenings is going to be even more brutal for the developing nations because of lack of systems, lack of financing, and the inability to, let's say, provide resources to their citizens. And again, I think time and again we've seen that when events like this happen, some form of aid is definitely provided by the developed world, but most likely all these events eventually lead to, let's say, from a short to medium term perspective, a significant decline in the standard of life, right, in all these places.
There's no point crying over spilt milk. If damage happens and then you provide aid, rather than that, you know, prepone the whole thing and provide resources so that you don't have to provide the aid,
I think this entire thing is definitely, if you look at it from a lens of, let's say, proactive, reactive thing, right? The climate has become a thing where you just constantly reacting to the different, negative events that are happening. Whereas the world is, let's say, less inclined to proactively put systems, places, financing before, so that even if these events happen, the the eventual impact reduces. But
the whole idea is, it's a three-pronged approach to address climate. It's mitigation, where you reduce the emissions per se, or you nip the evil in the bud. The second is adaptation. That should something happen, you prepare the society, you prepare the systems, the processes, so that we are able to take care of it, so that the impact can be reduced. And the third is loss and damage. That should any calamity happen, we are in a position to get help and aid to them very quickly. So these are called sequential bullets in our arsenal, because the more we invest in mitigation, the less will be the need for adaptation, right? The more we invest in adaptation, the less will be the need for loss and damage. And the more we invest in loss and damage, lesser will be the human suffering. And that's our objective. That's our ultimate aim, that human suffering should not be there. So, if we kind of pull the investments all up front and start putting in mitigation and adaptation, I think we'll be in better shape.
You talk about, a couple of hotbeds which should be on our radar, right? And these are certain flashpoints where if we are able, let's say, if the world breaches these flashpoints, we could sense some trouble brewing. Could you talk about these flashpoints?
Sure. The two hotbeds or the flashpoints are really the permafrost and the ice shelves in the Antarctic, right? Now, just to give you an idea, permafrost is frozen soil, and you find permafrost generally in the Arctic region. And this is like centuries ago, a lot of biomass got buried, and then kind of ice started accumulating over that. So it's frozen kind of land right now. And estimates are that permafrost itself has approximately 2 times the carbon dioxide or greenhouse gases that currently exist in the atmosphere, right? 1,500 gigatons, if I'm not mistaken. That's a huge amount. And if that gets released, the average global temperature would rise by around 6 degrees, which means mayhem, right? So what is happening is, because of the global warming and rise in temperature, this permafrost is thawing, right? As it's thawing, the microbes are getting in, and decomposition is starting, right? And a lot of carbon dioxide is getting liberated.
So it has already this.
Yeah, in some parts it's kind of, the rate is very slow right now, but it's started, right? It also liberates a lot of methane, because what happens is, as the permafrost thaws, it creates water puddles. So beneath the water puddles, when there's anaerobic fermentation or decomposition that starts, which gives out methane, right? Now, as these greenhouse gases get into the atmosphere and their stock increases, the global warming increases. As the global warming increases, the temperature increases and more thawing happens. So it forms a positive feedback loop, right? Each circle becoming worse than the previous one, right? And the challenge is that if this feedback cycle becomes quicker and more intense, then we could see the release of permafrost very quickly. And that could be disastrous because that will shoot up the temperature rise. So we need to kind of watch against that, right? The second one I spoke about is the Antarctic ice shelves. So as we know, Antarctica has large glaciers, and glaciers move always, right? Now, what has happened is some of these large glaciers, as they were moving, they have gone and rested against the seabed, right? And are now held in position, right? Let me explain you the other way. Think of an ice shelf like a bottle of wine with a cork, and it's held slantingly, right? That cork is the one which is holding the wine from flowing down, flowing out, right? Now, think of the ice shelf as that cork which is holding the glacier behind. If that cork is taken out, the wine will flow. And in this case, if the ice shelf melts, then the whole glacier will start moving into the sea, right? Now, what is happening actually is because of global warming, these ice shelves are beginning to melt from the top and therefore weaken. But more importantly, as we spoke earlier, the currents in the ocean, and especially what comes from the north to the Antarctic, those undersea currents are warming up, right? They're getting warmer water now. And that warm water is hitting at the bottom of these ice shelves and melting it from there. So they're getting weakened from the top and they're getting weakened from the bottom, right? And therefore they are under threat. Now, if these ice shelves melt, as I mentioned earlier, the glaciers will start flowing into the sea. And as that happens, the whole glacial system, which is kind of very set and adjusted right now, begins to weaken. And we have the threat of more and more ice coming into the sea. Now, as that happens, the sea level rises. And just to give you an idea, if just two glacial systems in the world were to melt, which is the Antarctica and the Greenland, the global sea level will rise by around 210 feet. So imagine most of our population lives in coastal areas. Most of our big cities are in the coastal areas. Imagine them 210 feet deep in water. So what will happen? Land will shrink, people will migrate, and people will not only migrate from the coastal areas, people will also migrate from areas which are getting very warm, right? And it's not only people who will migrate, animals will migrate as well, right? And as this happens, the proximity between humans and animals will increase. And as that happens, the transfer of diseases from animals to humans will increase. These are called zoonotic diseases, right? But more dangerously, there are a lot of animals, rodents, insects, birds, which so far haven't come in contact with people. And they're called reservoir hosts because they carry pathogens, viruses, which we have had no exposure to. We have no idea what kind of diseases can they unleash.
No exposure to and hence no immunity to.
And no immunity, absolutely. And what kind of pandemics they would create. So that's one of the kind of fallouts of what we just spoke about, the sea level rise.
From the Arctic, we'd see more and more, let's say, organic matter getting decomposition, leading to more carbon dioxide. and from the Arctic point of view, the warmer waters are reducing the, let's say, the holding capacity of the stability of the ice shelves, and therefore the glacier systems will melt, therefore leading to the rise, move into the
oceans.
Okay.
Give a
quick right.
No, I'm not saying that this is going to happen now or today or tomorrow. It could take still decades, centuries, or But you need to be cognizant of these and start working towards seeing how we kind of avoid such situations from happening.
Definitely. And I think one of the next factors which you mentioned, right, that as sea levels rise, or let's say as the proximity between animals and humans, starts to reduce, we could be, similar to what happened during COVID as well, right? It was a virus.
Actually, COVID could have been one of the, it could have been a virus of originating just as what we spoke.
Right. So therefore, we could also see fallouts from health point of view, for the population, where animal induced, or let's say viruses coming from animals which haven't been exposed to us yet could lead to,
Actually, health will be the biggest victim of climate change.